Good morning. I'm joined here with Clark Aldrich, and Clark is the creator of Short Sims, a revolutionary new pedagogy designed to fill a critical gap in educational media by delivering greater speed, active content, and better metrics. Clark develops custom short sims through shortsims.com, and he also trains designers to create their own short sims based on his newest book, Short Sims, Game Changer. Clark's work's been featured lots of different places, and I'm really excited to talk with him this morning. You'd find him in Fortune magazine and on CNN, and his work in educational media has been covered and featured in thousands of places: CBS, ABC, New York Times, and all around really great guy. And I do love getting a chance to talk to Clark anytime that's possible. We're doing some cool work together through the Allen Academy, but I thought we'd take a few minutes this morning, Clark, and just talk about short sims. And I've got some examples that we'll pull up, but while I'm doing that, maybe talk a little bit about what are they?
Sure. Short sims are kind of educational media, the same way that perhaps video is, or audio in some cases, or PowerPoint slides. But it's a kind of educational media that's focusing on giving learners as many different interesting decisions as possible. So we want to queue up a tremendous amount of interesting decisions for players, and then have them learn. In some cases, learn from getting it wrong. Some cases, learn Socratically by figuring things out on their own. In some cases, learning by just mucking around like in a laboratory and seeing what happens. This right here is a short sim around the demand curve. And what's fun is that you control the price of a drink, and so you can raise it and lower it. And you can see there in the bottom right-hand corner a demand curve that's actually showing you where it is on that. And it's a fun way. It's a very lab-like way. It's a fun way of experimenting with the concept of demand curves, where you can really teach yourself. And the goal, as often as you can, is that people teach themselves rather than being bossed around by someone and telling them what the right answer is. And it's very visual. In this case, it's very kinesthetic. It's sort of fun to click around and see what happens. This has a lab component to it, so it's fairly nonlinear as well. So it's a nice example of a fun way. Again, like the name implies, it's short. So in about a 5 or 7 or 10 minute experience, you've taught yourself sort of the basics of a demand curve in this case, in a way that's fairly fun and painless.
And just remove the screen with finish sim or start over. Can you talk just a tiny bit about what students typically it is short?
Sure. I love giving people the start over option because, frankly, I love giving students the skip the whole thing option too. So, I love giving people optional levels. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is someone is, 80% through the sim and they have one big hard level left, and say, hey, great, you've done it. Congratulations. Oh yeah, there happens to be one more level. It's pretty hard. You probably don't want to do it, but congratulations, you finished the sim. Now your options are goodbye, thanks, or try for the hardest level. And like 90% of the people go for the hardest level in that situation, which is really fun. So, you sort of trust the people, and the goal is to entice them and to suck them in as much as force them to do stuff. I love the play again option, because in some cases you do want to try something again. You do want to experiment in a different way. In some of the short sims I've done, the average playthrough is about 3 or 4 times, trying different techniques and sort of seeing what happens, especially in sort of more laboratory-like situations. So, I think those are fun ways of, again, challenging myself as a designer, but also challenging the student to get as much learning done as possible.
I think that's really neat. Teasing someone with a little bit, well, it's kind of hard. I'm not sure. You don't have
it's probably too hard for you. It's probably for the better students. The people who really get the stuff will have no problem with it. But maybe you should quit at this time. So and it's fun. And again, that requires that you've not wasted their time up to that point. That you sort of have a good relationship with the learner. There's an old funny. Someone once said of Apple computers compared to Microsoft that I like Apple products because they get me. And that notion of getting the learner is a really interesting one for me. And I always want to be the educational experiences that people say, oh, this gets me. This understands where I'm coming from. And I think that's always a goal. And people will spend more time with your experience if they feel like it gets them.
That's very cool. So I think they're a big deal, but for someone who's maybe a little bit skeptical,
As everyone should be skeptical.
Right.
We hear all the time about how this is a revolution. It's like, not so much. And again, I think our industry, unfortunately, is like obsessed with the next big thing, especially in terms of like consumer technology, and whether it's AI or whether it's mobile devices or whether it's, we just spend so much time getting so excited about the next big thing. And I'm gonna make the argument this actually is a big deal. And I think the first argument I'll make is this really is, it's a different approach than linear content when you have nonlinear content. When content is based around decision making, it's a different experience with the learner. I, as a learner, am not being lectured to, because I hate being lectured to. I hate being told what to do. It's the old Winston Churchill, I always like to learn. I don't always like being taught. And so it kind of gets around that. And it really puts the student in the center of the universe from a designer perspective. I think a lot about what is the student going to do rather than what does my experts say. And so it's more student-centric and less expert-centric. We talked about earlier, it does leave a more interesting, so if students are making a bunch of decisions, the metrics they leave behind are actually a lot more interesting. The metrics in terms of why did they make a mistake, what mistakes did they make? If you're making 5 or 6 decisions every minute or more, you're leaving behind a really interesting transcript of your activity. And so we can look at those metrics and say, this person really did understand this material pretty well, or this person did not know it at the beginning, but knew it at the end. So you almost have a level 3 built into the simulation if you do it that way. You can also start measuring time to making decisions. And one thing that I'm really intrigued with is what's the difference between someone getting it right in 5 seconds versus 25 seconds? And I think we're all realizing, you were, I'm sure, as was I, a pretty clever student, and we didn't always know the answer to the question, but we could often figure it out. So whether it's taking SAT tests or calculus or whatever, we're given these tests and we can often kind of figure out the answer. Whereas if I'd actually done my homework and studied, I would have known it instantly. And so there's a huge difference there. And so if someone knows the question and jumps in immediately, then we have a pretty good sense that they are more confident and they have a greater level of conviction than if they're sort of spending a long time trying to figure out the answer, even though in both cases they give the right answer. And so there's a lot more things. What's kind of interesting, and I've done traditional content, I've done computer game-like content, and I've done short sims. And what's interesting too is on the back end, complicated computer games are actually really awful to try to figure out what was really going on. You need actually a tremendous amount of processing. So short sims, I think, are sort of the Goldilocks between the too little of linear content, which are just a bunch of starts and stops, versus too much, which is this, every single mouse click is a different piece of information. And we did see some decent evaluation from Paradigm Learning and Paradigm Systems regarding America's Army. It's probably the only example of a computer game that's been analyzed for learning content successfully. So that aside, it's really hard to analyze computer games. So this is sort of this leaves a nice transcript. The other reason that's really important is because we are getting closer to a point when AI systems will start evaluating students. It's not there yet, but when you start giving them fairly linear content, so when a student goes through linear content and basically starting and stopping and making a few decisions along the way, or a few assessment kinds of questions along the way, they don't really. The transcript isn't very interesting. And so the AI actually has a very hard time comparing it to other people in a meaningful way. And so as we start creating AI systems, especially around adaptive learning platforms, we need to give these poor AI systems, you got to feel sorry for the AI. Before they take us all over, we got to feel a little more sympathetic. They have a very hard time grinding through, the kind of really boring data to kind of come up with any good insights. And so the nice thing about this, again, is it gives a tremendous amount of insights. And one other reason why that I think they're revolutionary is that we as all of education, we as K through 12 and higher ed, and certainly we in the corporate training world as well, have created a lot of content that's very traditional, very symbolic based, very reading based. It really has left out a tremendous amount of people that I'll call kinesthetic learners, and not in the traditional sense of kinesthetic learning, but in sort of the deeper sense of people who really need to bang on things, need to experiment, need to be in front of a learning experience. They don't want to be told anything; they want to learn it from themselves. And so this entire, and again, especially males, by the way, probably 30 or 40% of all males are kinesthetic learners. They want to learn by doing, not by listening, and they can't. And so we overwhelm them. And so this approach, it gets us a little closer. It's not perfect, but it gets us a little closer to the people who want to learn by doing, and allowing them to, again, invent their own theories, invent their own observations, and own them, not just be told what to do. So I think all of these reasons, and there's a couple more too, why this approach is actually changes things fairly significantly.
So that's fascinating. So I have a couple of questions. Then I'm gonna ask you the question that's on the screen, which is, are they relatively easy to make? As I'm looking at your examples on shortsims.com and the videos that are up there, and the examples of short sims that you can play, they're written and created in a very different way than something that someone might consider a more traditional or formal version of e-learning. Can you talk a little bit about how you act with subject matter experts in making on the screen? Because it feels to me like you're really only extracting from a subject matter expert what are alternatives when someone is faced with a decision. Give me just the reasonable alternatives, instead of what I think experts like to do a lot, which is give you all of the information. Over my 20 years worth of experience, here's all the stuff that you need in order to be an expert. It appears like it might be an easier conversation to have with a subject matter expert to just say, at this point, what are the reasonable mistakes that a person might do, and then you as a designer are off on your own. If that's right, I'd love to know. And does that make it in some ways easier to make these?
Sure. So I think I'll start with the first premise. These short sims are easier to make, and most of the short sims that I do take about 35 hours to make. It's a fairly robust number, and it can be higher than that if it's a whole new concept that we're digging into. If we don't know the best practices, if we're diving into new territory, it can be slightly less than that if it's a repeatable. If we're doing 10 sims on blank, then each one gets a little easier because we don't have to think about it. But so it's about a 35-hour work effort, soup to nuts. I mean, from I should do this to there, done, on to the next one. So completely done in about 35 hours of a developer time. Which means about one developer can do one sim a week, which is a little ambitious. More like probably a week and a half doing it part-time is probably a more realistic number. So you can do these things fairly quickly and fairly efficiently, and there's a lot of advantages to that. One advantage being is that they are easy to tweak. I think the more complicated an e-learning program is, the harder it is to go in and just tweak a few things and smooth it out. And I spend, of those 35 hours, the last 4 or 5 hours is just spent getting feedback from people, obviously, but then making all the little changes and all the little sanding, like you would with a rough piece of wood. But at the front end of the process, most of the short sims that I've produced can be done with 1 hour conversation with the subject matter expert towards your question. Mm. And what's really amazing is I've distilled, and again, I've done tremendous amount of interviews with subject matter experts, and basically I asked 2 questions, and it's really one, but there's 2. And one is, what's the right way of doing this thing? What's the best way of doing this thing? And that gives you the single brittle path of success, which is the bane of all learning, because that's what we always rely on. But the second thing that I asked them, which is 90% of the conversation, is, where do people get this wrong? What are mistakes people make when doing this? What are mistakes that new people make when they first come to this process? What are false assumptions they bring to the table? What are mistakes that experts make? What are things that throw the experts? What are things that someone can be really confident and have a lot of experience and totally mess up? And what are the consequences, and why do they make that mistake? What happens if they make that mistake? And in some cases, like say leadership, let's say a mistake is you're the boss at a room full of people, and you're ordering them around, and you're saying, hey, do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You over there do 7 and 8, 9, and 10. Okay, good, adjourned. And everyone goes, wow, great, off we go. And so that's that may be that's like a bad habit that you might have in the real world, and you can simulate that. What's really in this case, the feedback is, in the short term, everyone says, wow, you're a great boss. You're very decisive. You're very definitive. Great. But then the reality is, no one does what you actually tell them to do. No one understands exactly what you meant. People may have great ideas that didn't get implemented, and you have a much worse situation. And so, again, sometimes, playing out what people come up with, subject matter experts come up with as problems, is this weird combination of, the short-term feedback may be very positive, but the long-term feedback may be much more negative. And so it's not just a matter of what's right and wrong, but why is that right? Why is that wrong? What kind of feedback do they get both positive and negative for both right and wrong choices. So from that single question of, where do smart people or, where do good people get this wrong, you start playing out a tremendous amount of interesting things. And then from a sim design perspective, it can be, it can be a tricky thing to try to seduce people into bad behavior. Which is, really fun to do. But, how do you, if someone's like cybersecurity, they just didn't think about it. They didn't think it was going to be a problem, and it was, or they were too busy with something else, so they didn't get on something that, those are harder to do in a short sim, very possible to do, mind you, but that's what the book goes into. But those are a little harder than just sort of a simple mistake, because you have to, if I'm taking a course on cybersecurity and here's a cybersecurity issue, do you pay attention to it or not? Every single person, at that point is going to say, of course I'm going to pay attention to it. It's a course on cybersecurity. So, how do you, from an interview perspective, it's fairly easy to get that information. From a design perspective, it's a little harder to say, how can we trick people or how can we seduce people into making their real world behavior, not their, I'm being taught in a class, therefore I'm going to act perfectly behavior.
In organizations roll these out, do they tend to want to build a bunch of them around a singular topic, or do they interleave short sims with other modalities to extend, or both?
So the answer is both. And I think what's been very interesting so far is when I've had clients who've done both, who have done a combination of, let's say they're going to do an hour-long course on blank, and the first, year one, deployment one, it's about 25% short sims and about 75% traditional content, PowerPoints, and a couple of videos and a couple of audio clips. With clients, and I've had more than a handful of clients who I've been working with in this context for over many years, the percentage of simulations always goes up over time. So, year one is 25% sims, year two, it's like 35% sims, year three, it's like, 48% sims or 50% sims or something. And so, I think when clients deploy these things, they do start, and they do think in terms of multiple modalities, they do start creeping up the number of short sims. Now, the good thing, which means for people, is that you can introduce one or two short sims into your traditional course and see how it does. And so it's not a matter of saying, trust the guy on the screen, which I would never do. But you can do it for yourself. You can test this out. You can put in one short sim into your hour-long course for 8 minutes and see how it does. And most of the time, people are going to say, that was my favorite part of it, but the rest of the course was fine too. And then again, once you get that feedback, if you get that feedback, then you can start saying, good, let's do a second and a third and a fourth. Another aspect of what you're saying, which I think is almost even more interesting, is one thing, again, the notion of doing a simulation fairly quickly, a short sim is a really important part of the methodology. How quickly can we do a short sim, not just how do we create the perfect short sim? And the speed is really important for a bunch of reasons. And I think one thing we saw with the coronavirus is that the CLOs really were not invited to the CEO's emergency table in terms of how are we going to deal with this crisis. Because most people think of CLOs as producing content in months, it takes 3 months for them, for those guys over in training to produce anything.
Right.
So, that's great, good for them. They can teach sexual harassment or whatever it is they're doing now, or ethics or something, who cares about that? But, in terms of this crisis, don't invite the CLO to the table because, that's for the stuff that's long-term. If you start saying we can create short sims in a week or a week and a half, now suddenly you are invited to the table. Part of why you're also invited to the table if you're the CLO is because you can get in front of your backlogs. And so, most CLOs are buried in content. You have 1,000 requests and you can't meet them all. What if you can start producing content more quickly? Now you can meet them all. Now you can go from being reactive to proactive. So here's one that actually is, again, one of the build. Again, it was about a week and a half of building. It's sort of, what is it like to come back to the workplace? By the way, this sim is free. If you want to use it for your organization, you're welcome to it. It's on my webpage, shortsims.com, and you can grab it as a SCORM object and install it. It's a really interesting, thought-provoking sim about what is it like your first day back to work. And when do you wear your mask or not? When do you, how do you behave towards other people? Social distancing. What does the cafeteria look like? What does the guard station look like? What does a meeting look like? And so, again, it's a bunch of interesting decisions all around this notion of how to use effectively social distance. Also, can you expect in your workplace, when you get back in terms of plexiglass shields and whatever. So again, it's a fun sim. I strongly recommend playing it, and again, using it in your organization if it meets your needs. So I think that the notion of, again, of the CLO getting in front of things and doing things quickly. The other part about that is when you're building courses over like a 2-month course or a 3-month course, it always gets buried in scope creep. So, and you've known this forever, and you're halfway through and someone says, oh, we really need to add these 4 things, and what about these 6 things, and we really need to make this content perfect, and we need to cover everything there is to know about this topic. And scope creep is, kills you. It adds months. It just keeps the process going. And the whole short sim philosophy is much more the opposite of that. It's saying, we're going to teach one thing, we're going to teach it well, maybe teach 2 things, maybe 3 things, whatever. But we're going to create it, and we're going to get it out the door, and we're going to push it out into the world. And then we're going to build another one, and then we're going to build another one, and then we're going to build another one, and we're going to kind of keep. It's almost more like putting out a newspaper or putting on a cable news station or something, where let's have a steady stream of short sims that are going to inform a population. I think in a perfect environment, we haven't got there yet. We're getting closer. You have some communities doing 1 short sim a day because they have 6 designers working on it, and we're not quite there yet. We're almost there. And the organization expects to learn, to get 3 short sims a week or 4 short sims a week. And, you start nibbling away at all these things. And so in this case, maybe the first 3 are on cybersecurity because that's considered to be the biggest problem. But there's, and so by the time you're done with those 3, there may be 3 or 4 issues on cybersecurity you haven't covered yet. But let's move on to leadership because that's a bigger problem. Or let's go on to, in this case, social distancing in the workplace. That's the bigger one. And then we'll come back to pick up the cybersecurity ones next time we have a window, but let's get in front of these other more pressing things first. And so I think it's a very different thing from let's build the big perfect course to let's nibble away at everything and let's figure out what's the next most pressing thing, nibble away at that, and let's just keep a steady flow of these things going.
Yeah, I would think that, a short sim, since it isn't a huge time investment from the student's perspective, is rolling this medium out makes it far easier for an organization to give students autonomy about choosing what it is that they want to learn about. If a student has to make the investment that if I'm gonna fire up this course, it's gonna take me 3 hours to complete it. That's a lot of investment and time on the student side, even if they had autonomy, and they might choose not to. But if a short sim is only going to take me 10 minutes, that seems to lend itself to allow the user a lot more choice and influence over their destiny of what they're interested in learning about.
Yeah, I think so. There's a bunch of different things in terms of the burden of a learning program, and one of it is the time. Get out the stopwatch. How many minutes is this going to take? Another one is obviously the value of it. I got a lot out of that, or I did not. And then sort of the third leg of this tool is sort of basically engagement level. Like, oh, that was fun, or that wasn't fun. That was dreary and dreadful, or that was light and breezy and engaging. And And I think what's really fun too is because the creativity of the designer is forefront. You have people who drift towards this stuff very naturally and create very interesting, engaging interfaces and interesting situations, and they're really good at it. And I've seen people really like certain people's content. Like, oh, what else has Sarah done? Sarah does great stuff, and so Sarah speaks my language. And so I think you can create a situation where it's not quite auteurs, but you can have more personality and from the designer coming through, and that's part of the pleasure of taking a good course. And there's a bit of cleverness, there's a bit of slyness, there's a bit of wit, there's a bit of charm. I mean, when's the last time you had a course that had charm with it? But you can have a bit of charm, and it can be a little funny and a little wry and a little backhanded and stuff. And so in some cases subversive. And so I think you can do all this stuff. And again, it's 10 minutes. It's worst case you're done in 10, and it's not a big deal. But when it's good, it's really good.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I am so excited to have you joining the Allen Academy to start delivering an elective, so that folks who are interested in short sims can learn straight from the source and get a little practice. For those who are watching here this afternoon and this morning, Starting in June, the Allen Academy is featuring Clark Aldrich's work on short sims. It's something that you can register at the link that we're showing here on the screen. And we've got you signed up to do 5 sessions. Can you talk just a little bit about what happens inside a 5-session course on short sims?
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'm so happy and so thrilled to be part of this program. What we're going to do is we're going to walk people through to designing a short sim. So you're going to take this course, and you're going to, at the end of the day, at the end of the last session, you're going to have a working short sim that's going to be relevant to your organization. You know, and I'm going to be there to help you along the process of creating it. More importantly, you're going to have colleagues. I mean, we're going to have a bunch of people obviously taking this class, and you know, we're all there to help each other. And so, you know, in terms of what's a great topic, how can we narrow down the topic? The group, we're all going to discuss this. In terms of the interview, you know, the interview with the subject matter expert, how do we prepare for it? What are our thoughts there? Creating the setting. One of the single hardest parts of creating a good short sim is once you've done the interview with the subject matter expert and you have all your mistakes and you have all your notes and stuff, what does the setting look like that's going to be interesting and compelling and fun? Is it going to be a microcosm? Is it going to be, you know, if we're doing sexual harassment, are you going to be the person who's being harassed? Are you going to be the harasser? Are you going to be the friend of the person who's watching this whole thing? And what do they do? You know, if you're doing cybersecurity, are you going to be the bad guy? Or, you know, it's a lot more fun if you're doing a cybersecurity class to be the bad guy and say, how do we get people to click these buttons? And how do we reverse engineer and social engineering? And so creating the setting, or we're going to do a lab where people are going to experiment and play around with something. You know, suppose you're doing you know, figuring out sales compensation. Well, let's create a little lab where you are the CEO of the company and you're playing around with different sales compensation levels, and let's see what the impact is on the organization in terms of motivating right behavior. And let's see, you have 3 variables to work with. Let's play with all 3 of these and see in your organization what happens, knowing you can always just restart it. So, you know, again, it's you know, creating the setting of the sim is one of the biggest, you know, sort of most interesting creative steps of the whole process. We're going to work, you know, we'll do it as a group. Or, you know, let's all of us get together and we're going to all bang around each of our sims settings and kind of come up with the good one or come up with a creative one. What's the thing going to look like? What's, you know, are we going to go, you saw some of the graphics there were isometric, which are cool, but also take a little more time. You can have a great sim that just has words and some great, you know, very clever use of a couple of static images. So how are we going to design that part of the equation? So there's a bunch of really fun, you know, I mean, almost the greatest skill set for traditional e-learning designers is doggedness. You know, how do you kind of keep making yourself grind through this process despite the fact that no one really wants it to happen or everyone wants it to happen yesterday? And you know, and going through the lawyers and going through the experts and there's just a tremendous amount of doggedness that's required in traditional e-learning that really is ultimately demoralizing for a lot of very smart, creative people. What happens if we can kind of walk to the side of that? What happens when suddenly the skill set becomes creativity, not just doggedness? And so we're going to allow people to be that creative and that clever. And, you know, we like computer games. Let's take some affordances of computer games, whether it's the first sim we showed here had a mini map. It wasn't a first person shooter mini map or a driving game mini map. It was a demand curve mini map, but it was still a mini map where you can sort of see where you were in the process. You are here. So I think, so then what's the sim going to look like and feel like? And then obviously the fine tuning. In most cases, we're going to show it to real people and get their feedback. And they may say this stinks, or they may say, I love this, but these 4 things need to be changed or whatever. And how do we take their feedback and how do we sand it and make something that's very polished and finished? So and also what's really fun too, is during the course, so we have these five classes, which are going to be great and very interactive. But the last one other thing we're going to do is we're going to have one-on-one time. And so anyone who takes the class, we're going to spend a bit of time going through your sim on a one-on-one basis, and we can talk through it and we can sort of say, well, have you thought about this? Or what about this? Here's 3 ideas, 2 of them stink, but one of them's good. Figure out which one's the good one or whatever. And so that kind of one-on-one work around the sim, I think, is going to be another important activity to get people, to get people thinking about things. Again, mostly Socratic learning and mostly, you know, have you thought about this rather than here's the right answer. But, so again, the goal, my goal at the end of the day is for every single person to have a role model short sim that they can show everyone, whether it's on a portfolio or they're deploying their corporation the next day or whatever, and say, here's something that's great and I'm really proud of.
That's fantastic. And that sounds appealing to me. which is of course why we reached out to you to help put together this content for the Allen Academy. But I generally think that a lot of people are going to be really excited to go through this experience and have the opportunity.
And one more thing, just saying. So the other thing too is that this is a technology agnostic approach. And so, if you have a technology tool you love, use that tool. There's a few that I like that are there as defaults, and they're there too. And there's some free tool. There's some ability to do it for free if you don't want to invest in a tool, which is great. So again, this is not a tool-centric approach. This is agnostic, both from a technology perspective and even a philosophy perspective. And so it's this is something that you can do, you will do if you take this course.
Love it. Well, thanks so much for joining me this morning. Lots of great new exciting things certainly coming from your work, and I invite everyone to go out and check out shortsims.com to learn a little bit more about Clark's work, and of course check out his new book.
Absolutely, and check out all the courses on Allen Academy. They've really done a great job at pulling together some of the best people around, and really challenging all of us to bring our A game to and go beyond that to really produce a great course. So look around Allen Academy. There's a tremendous amount of courses around topics that are really, I think, increasingly crucial for everyone's career. I think we're all at a point where suddenly this whole distance learning stuff is going to be the sine qua non of all these different organizations. And so, again, I can't think of a better place. I'm thrilled to be part of it, than Allen Academy, to get these skills to people in a timely and efficient way.
Awesome.
So thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk again soon. This was a lot of fun.
Pleasure's mine.
Yeah. Thank you.